In this case study, I'm going to share exactly how we helped Kofi, a full time software engineer with a baby on the way, buy a $3.2 million business in 5 months. But first, let's talk about where Kofi started. Kofi had been searching for nearly a year on his own. He had submitted multiple LOIs and they all got rejected. And he was having trouble even finding good deals in his region, which is the DMV, or DC, Maryland, and Virginia. On top of that, he was working a full time job as a software engineer and had a baby on the way. Does any of that sound familiar to you? Because a lot of our current and potential pro members look like Kofi at the start. They're working full time, they think that they can just find a business on their own and only come to us after having burnt months or even years spinning their reels. So here's what happened 5 months after Kofi decided to really lean in and commit with us. He acquired a $3.2 million home restoration business. The business was cash flowing $714K a year, and he went from zero to closed in 5 months. But that's just his first big win. Kofi's already on his way to buying another $3 million business just 6 months later. And he's learned the ins and outs of the acquisition game enough to get quite a sweetheart deal. Around 2x multiple, the majority of the business being financed by the seller. But how did he get here so quickly? How did Kofi buy this fantastic business when 7 to 8 other people failed to close on it? What did he do to grow that company's revenue from 4.2 million to 5 million in the first 6 months alone? And how did Kofi go from struggling to even finding deals and getting his LOIs rejected for nearly a year to closing on an over $3 million business in just 5 months? These are the questions we're going to answer. Let's start with the first major challenge. The business Kofi ended up buying had actually gone through 7 to 8 potential buyers before Kofi even closed on the deal. To make his achievement even more impressive, one of the people who had already tried to buy the business was the general manager and son in law of the seller. So, what made Kofi's approach different? In 2 words, we taught him seller psychology. But let's make it tactical for everyone. So, when selling their business, a seller isn't just selling a car or a house. Those are fairly transactional sales. Sell one, get another, move on. The seller has already owned their business for years, often decades. They've often built it up from the ground up. They've hired all the employees. They know their families. In short, their identity is often all wrapped up in being an owner. And add on top of that, that the sale of their business is usually the biggest transaction of their career. It's a culmination of decades of work, and they're finally going to get paid out. So if you keep that in mind and realize that emotions are par for the course, you'll win. But how do you win? During your first seller call, you have to understand what they actually want. This is where we usually provide over 50 seller interview questions and tailor them with our members one-on-one. But let's summarize some of the key points that are always relevant. First, do they want cash upfront? In almost all cases, the more money you can provide upfront to a seller, the more likely they are to entertain your offer. This is why using the SBA is so powerful. They'll allow you to come up with a huge amount of the business's purchase price front loaded with 10% down, sometimes even less. But you have to remember that most sellers would rather keep running their business and making all the money they are making if you're not willing to provide them cash upfront. Second, why do they actually want to sell? You should always try to understand a seller's motivation for selling. And you can usually get pretty good at understanding that in the first few calls. So, is it the big reasons for a sale, like death, disability, divorce, or distress? Or is it disagreement between the partners or family members in the business, dissatisfaction? Perhaps the owner simply has lost interest or passion, or debt, because mounting debt can pressure a sale. But sussing this out early means you can cater to the seller. And next, what are they looking for in you as the buyer? Remember, you're taking over their legacy and their business. And some sellers care less about what happens to business after they sell and just want the largest number possible. But others are very wary of handing off their business to someone they think will run it into the ground or dismantle it. So get a sense for what they want to happen to their business. Okay, on to the second priority to win with sellers. A lot of buyers are expecting the sellers to know what all the steps are and are leaning too heavily on the broker to keep the deal moving. Remember, the broker is not on your side, and the seller has usually never done this before either. So something we try to really hammer home and help do with our M&A advisors one-on-one is move fast, because time kills all deals. It's really important that you dictate the pace. You always want to end a call or an email with the next step. For example, if it's a broker, you want to try to set up a seller call. If it's a seller call, you want to let them know an IOI or an LOI is coming. If it's into an LOI, then you want to hand over a checklist you both can work off of and begin aggressively checking it off. You want to sell the owner on the fact that you're the best buyer for the business. You've done your research. You have the financing lined up. And you're going to make this painless so they can drive off into the sunset with their millions. Because remember, this is an emotional transaction for the seller. They are going to get cold feet at points. They are going to act bullheaded at some points. This is their business, and you're going through it with a fine-toothed comb. All of your critiques or questions are a direct question on their business. But we tell our pro members all the time, if you keep a cool head, if you keep the process moving, and keep the big payout front and center for the seller, you'll have an amazing business by the end of it, and they'll have gotten their big payday. Now, a big question potential students ask is, how are people doing after their acquisition? That leads us to challenge number 2 for Kofi. How did he grow revenue from $4.2 million to $5 million in his first 6 months? Kofi took 3 major steps. First, understanding the opportunities for growth. Kofi took the first few weeks and months to get a lay of the land and understand how money moves through the business and really diving into the quality of earnings analysis he did with our diligence partners before closing. Second, he realized there's a lot of potential expanding out of purely residential restoration into commercial restoration. And third, Kofi turned on the digital marketing faucet through Google reviews and advertising. All of these lead to an insight that a lot of business owners realize after acquisition. In Kofi's case, it was the previous owner was old-fashioned and more focused on pulling out as much profit as possible versus reinvesting in growth. This is actually very common and more of a benefit than an obstacle. Every yellow flag or issue you found in due diligence is now an opportunity. In many ways, you have a running checklist of all things you can do to improve the business. Now, initiative number 1 for Kofi was he expanded into the commercial vertical for the business. Previously, only around 5% of work was commercial, but very quickly after taking over the business, Kofi signed a vendor agreement with a nearby university and landed an over $200K job after a dorm fire soon after. So remember, always keep an eye out for places where the seller just wasn't willing to expend the effort, because a big plus you have as a new owner is a much sharper focus towards growth versus just cashing out on the business. Now, initiative number 2 for Kofi was digital marketing improvements. He set up and optimized his business Google profile and local service ads, which increased lead volume by about 35% year to date, and has allowed him to shift from relying heavily on middlemen to direct online leads, meaning higher profit per job. You can often find low-hanging fruits like this during diligence as you make your transition plan, and so it really pays to think this through before you take the reins. Now, how did Kofi go from struggling to even finding deals and getting his LOIs rejected for nearly a year to closing on an over $3 million business in 5 months? Well, we implemented our 6-part business buying framework. So let me explain. Step 1 is locking in deal flow. Kofi already had a lot of issues with finding the right deals in his area. He told us that in his initial application to work with us. So, Kofi joined on July 6th and had the deal he ended up closing sourced for him by July 16th. How? Well, we did an onboarding call with him, got him to clarify his deal box, and then began sending him tailored deals as soon as they came on market. This is the exact deal sheet we used with Kofi, and the business he ended up buying was on his radar within 2 weeks of joining the program, as you can see in orange. That's how quickly things can get moving. Number 2 was the one-on-one M&A advisory. That advisory was helping him review deals. It was helping him structure deals, negotiate deals, and it was helping him figure out where the red flags were on the deals he wanted to pursue through both a dedicated Slack channel and one-on-one Zoom calls. For Kofi, we jumped into the deep end immediately and helped him send out 2 LOIs within his first 2 weeks, and one of those ended up being the restoration company he ended up closing on. This was a message within 2 weeks of Kofi joining the program. He and one of our M&A advisors, Bill, had already reviewed 3 different businesses. Most of the breakdown in this was on the business he ended up pursuing and closing. Then we helped Kofi find lenders that we had already pre-vetted as high quality. Partners we knew were willing to give competitive offers, close quickly, and with confidence, not leaving our members at the altar right before close like some do. A pro tip that was relevant for Kofi here is if you have real estate in your deal, you can actually increase your SBA loan from the default 10-year term up to 25 years, depending on how much of your deal is real estate. So Kofi was able to lock in a 25-year amortization for his loan because he had real estate in his loan. And that made his debt payments very manageable and gave him a lot more cash flow to reinvest in growing his business. A recent addition is we've actually secured a special arrangement with select SBA lenders in our network. They've been so impressed with the success of our program and members that they're now counting the cost of our program, QB, and legal fees toward the SBA down payment. So that means that our program is effectively free when you close a deal. All right, so after Kofi had his lender process moving, we gave him a pre-vetted deal team that would handle his financial and legal diligence at half the usual price with hundreds of similar deals under their belt. That way, Kofi could focus on understanding the business, negotiating with sellers, and getting ready to take over the business, not get bogged down in line item reviews of contracts and balance sheets. The quality of earnings he got in advance actually helped him tackle the hardest part of the transition, which is managing the cash flow cycle. Kofi had already gotten heads up that this was going to be a challenge when listening to a podcast episode discussing cash flow issues in construction related businesses. So before closing, he re-reviewed his quality of earnings and working capital analysis with our partner QB provider, accelerating his learning curve, and developed a payment and invoicing strategy to better manage timing between receiving income and paying expenses. Now, being proactive with cash flow planning really helped Kofi avoid early stage financial problems. And throughout that whole process, Kofi had a community of people who were buying businesses and asking questions about business buying that Kofi actually didn't even know to ask, and closing on their own deals every single week. People just like him. Kofi, too, ended up paying it forward after closing. He recently came on to do a roundtable discussion along with 4 other recently closed pro alumni to discuss lessons learned from taking over his business, and even flew up from DC to New York to attend our in-person gathering with 30 other business buyers. And last but not least, we provided Kofi with plug-and-play resources. What should I send a broker? Having email scripts for that. How should I do diligence? Having checklists for that. How should I send an LOI? Having a template for that with real-life examples. How should I calculate my returns? Having a model for that. How should I present my business plan to a lender? Having a template for that. Having just pre-battle tested templates and plug-and-play resources that Kofi could use at every step of the process. And he's not alone. There's countless examples here of students we've helped do the same. In fact, we've helped close over $60 million in transactions in the past year alone. Let me be clear though, this isn't for most of you. You need to have at least 50 to 100K liquid capital to invest in down payment. You need to want to actually start your journey in the next 30 days, and you need to want to buy business in the next 6 to 12 months. That's why we require you to put through an application to see if you're a fit, because we don't want you to waste your time and we don't want to waste ours. And then you'll talk to one of our enrollment advisors so they can walk you through what size deals you can afford, what are the costs in buying a business, and how you can mitigate them, and how do you find investors to back your deal if you need them. And on top of that, we want to give you feedback on your investment thesis. That's the business deal size, location, types of businesses you're looking at, and share what kind of returns you can expect from buying a business. So if that sounds like you, and this is something that's gotten you excited, and you feel like it's something you can do, just please schedule a call below, and we'll see if you're a fit.